and Morris, with a gentle sentiment of triumph, looked round upon the scene of his achievements. Yes, he could deny all knowledge of it now. The lobby, beyond the fact that it was partly ruinous, betrayed no trace of the passage of Hercules. But it was a weary Morris that crept up to bed. His arms and shoulders ached, the palms of his hands burned from the rough kisses of the coal axe, and there was one smarting finger that stole continually to his mouth. Sleep long delayed to visit the dilapidated hero, and with the first peep of day it had again deserted him. The morning, as though to accord with his disastrous fortunes, dawned inclemently. An easterly gale was shouting in the streets, flaws of rain angrily assailed the windows, and as Morris dressed, the draught from the fireplace vividly played about his legs. "I think," he could not help observing bitterly, "that with all I have to bear, they might have given me decent weather." There was no bread in the house, for Miss Hazeltine, like all women left to themselves, had subsisted entirely upon cake. But some of this was found, and, along with what the poets call a glass of fair cold water, made up the semblance of a morning meal. And then down he sat undauntedly to his delicate task. Nothing can be more interesting than the study of signatures, written, as they are, before meals and after, during indigestion and intoxication, written when the signer is trembling for the life of his child, or has come from winning the Derby, in his lawyer's office, or under the bright eyes of his sweetheart. To the vulgar these seem never the same, but to the expert, the bank clerk, or the lithographer, they are constant quantities, and as recognisable as the North Star to the night watch on deck. To all this Morris was alive. In the theory of that graceful art in which he was now embarking, our spirited leather merchant was beyond all reproach. But, happily for the investor, forgery is an affair of practice; and as Morris sat surrounded by examples of his uncle's signature and of his own incompetence, insidious depression stole upon his spirits. From time to time the wind wuthered in the chimney at his back. From time to time there swept over Bloomsbury a squall so dark that he must rise and light the gas. About him was the chill and the mean disorder of a house out of commission, the floor bare, the sofa heaped with books and accounts enveloped in a dirty tablecloth, the pens rusted, the paper glazed with a thick film of dust; and yet these were but adminicles of mystery, and the true root of his depression lay round him on the table in the shape of misbegotten forgeries. "It's one of the strangest things I ever heard of," he complained. "It almost seems as if it was a talent that I didn't possess." He went once more minutely through his proofs. "A clerk would simply gibe at them," said he. "Well, there's nothing else but tracing possible." He waited till a squall had passed, and there came a blink of scowling daylight. Then he went to the window, and in the face of all John Street traced his uncle's signature. It was a poor thing at best. "But it must do," said he, as he stood gazing woefully upon his handiwork. "He's dead, anyway." And he filled up the cheque for a couple of hundred, and sallied forth for the Anglo Patagonian Bank. There, at the desk at which he was accustomed to transact business, and with as much indifference as he could assume, Morris presented the forged cheque to the big red-bearded Scots teller. The teller seemed to view it with surprise, and as he turned it this way and that, and even scrutinized the signature with a magnifying glass, his surprise appeared to warm into disfavour. Begging to be excused for a moment, he passed away into the rearmost quarters of the bank, whence, after an appreciable interval, he returned again in earnest talk with a superior, an oldish and a baldish, but a very gentlemanly man. "Mr. Morris Finsbury, I believe," said the gentlemanly man, fixing Morris with a pair of double eyeglasses. "That is my name," said Morris, quavering. "Is there anything wrong?" "Well, the fact is, Mr. Finsbury, you see, we are rather surprised at receiving this," said the other, flicking at the cheque. "There are no effects." "No effects!" cried Morris. "Why, I know myself there must be 28 pounds, if there's a penny." "2764, I think," replied the gentlemanly man. "But it was drawn yesterday." "Drawn!" cried Morris. By your uncle himself, sir, continued the other. Not only that, but we discounted a bill for him for, let me see, how much was it for, Mr. Bell? 800, Mr. Judkin, replied the teller. Bent Pitman, cried Morris, staggering back. I beg your pardon, cried Mr. Judkin. It's only an expletive, said Morris. I hope there's nothing wrong, Mr. Finsbury, said Mr. Bell. All I can tell you, said Morris, with a harsh laugh, is that the whole thing's impossible. My uncle is at Bournemouth, unable to move. Really? cried Mr. Bell, and he recovered the cheque from Mr. Judkin. But this cheque is dated in London, and today, he observed. How do you account for that, sir? Oh, that was a mistake, said Morris, and a deep tide of colour dyed his face and neck. No doubt, said Mr. Judkin, but he looked at his customer inquiringly. And, resumed Morris, even if there were no effects, this is a very trifling sum to overdraw. Our firm, the name of Finsbury, is surely good enough for such a wretched sum as this. No doubt, Mr. Finsbury, returned Mr. Judkin, and if you insist, I will take it into consideration, but I hardly think. In short, Mr. Finsbury, if there had been nothing else, the signature seems hardly all that we could wish. That's of no consequence, replied Morris nervously. I'll get my uncle to sign another. The fact is, he went on with a bold stroke, my uncle is so far from well at present that he was unable to sign this cheque without assistance, and I feel that my holding the pen for him may have made the difference in the signature. Mr. Judkin shot a keen glance into Morris's face, and then turned and looked at Mr. Bell. "Well," he said, "it seems as if we had been victimised by a swindler. Pray tell Mr. Finsbury we shall put detectives on at once. As for this cheque of yours, I regret that, owing to the way it was signed, the bank can hardly consider it, what shall I say, business-like," and he returned the cheque across the counter. Morris took it up mechanically. He was thinking of something very different. In a case of this kind," he began, "I believe the loss falls on us. I mean upon my uncle and myself." "It does not, sir," replied Mr. Bell. "The bank is responsible, and the bank will either recover the money or refund it. You may depend on that." Morris's face fell. Then it was visited by another gleam of hope. "I tell you what," he said, "you leave this entirely in my hands. I'll sift the matter. I've an idea at any rate. And detectives," he added appealingly, "are so expensive." "The bank would not hear of it," returned Mr. Judkin. "The bank stands to lose between £3,000 and £4,000. It will spend as much more if necessary. An undiscovered forger is a permanent danger. We shall clear it up to the bottom, Mr. Finsbury. Set your mind at rest on that." "Then I'll stand the loss," said Morris boldly. "I order you to abandon the search." He was determined that no inquiry should be made. "I beg your pardon," returned Mr. Judkin, "but we have nothing to do with you in this matter, which is one between your uncle and ourselves. If he should take this opinion, and will either come here himself, or let me see him in his sick room—" "Quite impossible," cried Morris. "Well, then, you see," said Mr. Judkin, "how my hands are tied. The whole affair must go at once into the hands of the police." Morris mechanically folded the cheque and restored it to his pocket book. "Good morning," said he, and scrambled somehow out of the bank. "I don't know what they suspect," he reflected. "I can't make them out. Their whole behaviour is thoroughly unbusinesslike. But it doesn't matter. All's up with everything. The money has been paid. The police are on the scent. In 2 hours that idiot Pitman will be nabbed, and the whole story of the dead body in the evening papers." If he could have heard what passed in the bank after his departure, he would have been less alarmed, perhaps more mortified. "That was a curious affair, Mr. Bell," said Mr. Judkin. "Yes, sir," said Mr. Bell, "but I think we have given him a fright." "Oh, we shall hear no more of Mr. Morris Finsbury," returned the other. It was a first attempt, and the house have dealt with us so long that I was anxious